Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, bro?
Quite a bit going on today. So we've got the Liberals releasing data on the economic impact of the carbon tax, Trudeau's housing target getting further away with $750 billion of infrastructure needed, Canadians planning mass protests against uncontrolled and reckless immigration policies, leaders warning of diplomatic isolation if Canadian military spending targets are not met, the bioweapon blueprint with China manufacturing the next pandemic, maybe with Canada's help, and the former CDC director predicting that the bird flu virus will cause the next pandemic.
All right, before we get started today, we have a short announcement to make for our audience at Blendr. When we launched Blendr News, our mission was to bring you the stories that we felt matter while offering the perspective or context that we thought was missing. And over the last 10 months, we've been doing our best to bring this to life. However, we feel like there's more we could be doing. As of today, we have launched a Substack channel where we will be releasing several original articles every week, focusing on bringing you in-depth investigative journalism and opinion pieces. Our Substack will also host exclusive podcasts where we answer audience questions and try our best to foster a community dedicated to standing against relentless corruption and authoritarianism. For the next 2 weeks, we will be offering our monthly subscription at $5 a month for life. Following this initial period, we will be increasing the cost to $10. Now, we're doing this because it will allow us to keep the lights on without the need for an abundance of corporate partners. And quite honestly, we can't think of a better scenario than being accountable to nobody but our readers. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can find us at substack.com/BlenderNews.
All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got the Liberals releasing data on the economic impact of the carbon tax. The Liberals have released an estimate of the carbon tax's impact on the Canadian economy following Conservative pushback after issuing a gag order on the parliamentary budget officer, restricting him from discussing the data. According to federal modeling data, Canada's GDP is expected to be about $25 billion lower in 2030 due to carbon pricing, which is about 1% below what it would be without the tax. The Conservatives have accused the Liberal government of hiding the bulk of the analysis, arguing it would show that Canadians are worse off under the carbon tax. This allegation arose after PBO Yves Giroux told the House of Commons Finance Committee that the Liberal government was withholding the economic impacts of the carbon tax. Quote, "We've seen that report, but we've been told explicitly not to disclose it and reference it," he said. The carbon tax remains unpopular among Canadians, with a survey in April showing that 69% do not support increasing carbon pricing. However, the tax is set to raise by $15 per ton annually until it reaches $170 per ton in 2030. So will Trudeau's government continue to claim that Canadians are better off economically because of this tax, even after this obvious report stating otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they can't backtrack at this point, right? It's been kind of like their climate agenda or their inclusionary, their diversity, equity, inclusion sort of program. These are core tenets of the Liberal policy and Liberal strategy. They can't backtrack on this. It would be like the ultimate admission of being wrong for Trudeau, which we know just doesn't happen. And look, you know that they only shared data from 2030 to try to shut up the Conservatives and say, hey, we're sharing information. Because they control the media, what they're going to do is go, we shared data. The Conservatives wanted it. We shared it. What's wrong here, guys? But they only showed you what they could make look at least semi-reasonable. I'm willing to bet they actually manipulated those results too, because there's no way to really say what's going to happen 6 years down the line. It's just a simple forecast. You can tweak a little bit here and there. But what highlights, for me, I guess what really stands out as this is such bullshit is we have real-time data from today, which they won't share, which we know would make a huge impact on Canadians, how we feel about the carbon tax, and whether or not we continue to move forward with this initiative. But I think we all know, like, if 70% of people say they don't want it, like I say, I've said this before, the other 30%, most of them probably just don't understand it because it's not doing anybody any favors. And just to be clear, for people that think the carbon tax goes to the environment, 90% of it, according to the federal government, 90% of it goes back in rebates. I can't imagine that being the case, but let's just say that it is. The reason I say that is because there's administrative costs, which we know we have a fat, bloated government that wastes money with an efficiency of about 20%. So, okay, 90% of whatever's left over goes back to rebates, right? And the other 10% is supposed to be for marginalized communities. That's the whole intention. That's what the carbon tax is for. I don't even know why they brand it has anything that has anything to do with the environment, because it doesn't solve any environmental problems, right? So the whole thing to me is completely ridiculous, and I don't think there's any way they backtrack, regardless of what these reports say.
Well, despite this obviously not being beneficial for Canadians, I think the way that they would try to sell that is saying, well, look, we are saving the climate by offering a stick to anybody who does activities which degrade the climate and or cause it to change. And then we're going to take that money that we've taken away with our stick, and we're going to give it to the people in need of this money. So I think they'd probably just look at it as like, we're taking money away from polluters and giving it to people that are in poverty. And so I think that would probably be their whole angle.
Except the thing is, it's a carbon tax to save the environment. And the reality is most of the money comes from Canadian people, from people that own homes and from citizens, whether you're paying for it for heating your home or at the gas pumps. That's where the majority of it's coming from. So it's a hard thing to push on people, when the reality is, like, the PBO says it's going to cost Canadians an extra nearly $1,000 a year for a family of four.
Yeah, and then also that's also just what they're losing out of their pocket each year. But then also now what we're seeing is that this harms our overall GDP, which would, harm their ability to actually earn more. Correct me if I'm wrong, but no, there's still been no reports as to how much money they've currently taken in from the carbon tax, right? Or what they've even done with that money.
There's some forecasts on it. I don't know if there's exact things that have been released. But I know, like, the amount of HST they're going to earn on the carbon tax this year is over $500 million.
Right, because that's another factor that's is just insane about this, right? Is that when you normally have your bill, the taxes are on the subtotal, but especially with the natural gas and stuff on the carbon front, that's just added into the actual charge. That's part of the subtotal, and then they add the HST on top of that. So a tax on a tax.
Yeah, it's pretty egregious how we're taxed in this world. I'm actually going to do a piece on it very soon. But then to your point about where the money's going, so we know currently that there's over $5 billion sitting in a pot that was supposed to be handed out to small businesses. No timeline on when that's going to be sent out.
Wow.
Yeah. So from what we do know is it's corrupt and abused.
And then, I did a breakdown of just what the average person already pays in taxes in Canada. And if you go through it, it's like $55,000 is the average annual income. And then through income tax, they would pay $11,419, and then an additional nearly $4,000 into EI and CPP. And then also 32% of fuel costs right now are taxes. So you can roughly work that out to about $1,000 a year that they're paying in taxes at the pump. An additional $6,000 in property taxes. And then, so all of that included would be roughly $22,376 annually to the government. So that would leave the average person in Canada with just 60% of their income. But then there's also a 13% HST on top of that, right? So every time they spend that dollar. So you're actually really looking at the average person in Canada is spending 50% on taxes already. So this whole idea that more taxes is going to fix anything is ridiculous. And there was actually, I can't remember the economist's name, but it's common sense to me, where there was this curve. And if you look up just like a normal bell curve, it's the percentage that people of tax revenue, where once taxes get to a certain oppressive point, people start looking for every corner that they can cut into paying it, or they'll just outright leave that country. So at a certain tax percentage point, you actually end up getting less tax revenue, because people will, or some people might even just be incentivized to just say, why am I working my ass off to give 50% of it away? I'm just going to, live, I'm going to collect welfare or whatever, any of these kind of things.
That's actually one of the things I've seen people say on our channel when we talk about UBI. They're like, oh, if they're giving out free money and I have to do the work, I'm not going to do any more work. Forget that. This is stupid. Yeah. Because they're just going to be giving it away anyway. It's just ridiculous. Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you look at that. This whole war on tax in the United States started over 2% tax on tea, and now we're at over 50% of your money's being taxed. And what's worse is the country's in shambles. There is nothing you can point to, nothing, not one thing that the government is doing with our tax dollars that you can say is efficient and effective? Nothing.
Yeah.
It's fucking insane that they're taking in that much money and fucking everything up. It just makes it so much worse. Like, there's some Scandinavian countries where they get taxed just as much as us, but they've got the best healthcare in the world. Their society's relatively safe. Their education is free. Post-secondary education is free. You kind of look at scenarios like that and you go, I don't want to pay this much in tax, but at least there's more in the system for the people that are paying it. Here you get nothing. It's all bullshit. The Liberal government has been surviving off virtue signaling and spending money on DEI over the last 9 years. It's absolutely insane what's happening here.
I will say there is a good reason as to why why those programs work better in some Scandinavian countries, and it's mostly, this is definitely something that's controversial to say, but a lot of it is because they have a very homogenous culture.
No, it's true. And it's just factual. Like, I understand you can over contextualize it, but it's a fact.
Yeah. Yeah,
I agree. It is what it is.
And you look at Canada, and we're the exact opposite right now.
It's our strength, Liam.
Yeah.
Canada doesn't have any strengths left. Yeah. Literally, what would you say Canada's strength is right now?
No, we don't. No.
That's what I mean. We don't even leverage our natural resources properly. What do we do?
And even if you look at the finals, we're not even that good at hockey anymore.
It's so depressing.
But that leads us into our next story with the government inefficiency, which is Trudeau's housing target is now getting further away with $750 billion of infrastructure required to fulfill Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's ambitious goal of building nearly 4 million new homes by 2031. Over $750 billion will be needed for infrastructure development. Achieving 2004 levels of housing affordability requires over $100,000 per home on infrastructure alone, according to a Canadian Urban Institute report. With housing affordability at an all-time low in April, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation estimated that an additional 3.5 million houses are needed by 2030. However, housing starts declined by over 11% between 2021 and 2023. So will this housing crisis just continue to worsen in Canada, you think?
Significantly. And I think this is just one more thing that highlights the flaws in sort of Trudeau's rhetoric around this topic. I mean, he says these things to sound like the savior, but we already knew this plan was nearly impossible. Aside from an additional $750 billion, or effectively $125 billion per year for the next 6 years, which, let me put that into perspective. The federal government currently spends about $30 billion a year on infrastructure. So it's not even close to where they're currently spending. In addition to that, the 4 million homes required by 2030 are at best, like I said, impossible. And if we have a calendar year, we will build around 250,000 homes. And this is being generous because it's unlikely. And we've never done it before. We've never even gotten that close to it. So even if we did that for 6 years, we'd only have 1.5 million homes. So we're going to fall 60% short of our target anyway. But here's where the math gets worse. These are extra homes. That's, I think people are getting lost. It's not just 4 million. It's 4 million extra homes. So this doesn't include the pre-existing number we're already averaging. So effectively, we're making 0% progress on this initiative. Our immigration is going to continue to skyrocket and our economy is weak. So they're lowering rates as a counterbalance, which will raise housing prices by as much as 20% over the next 2 years. So in my opinion, this housing crisis hasn't even started yet.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. And so to put it into perspective on size-wise, the Canadian Urban Institute highlighted the immense scale of this task, equating the annual construction needs to building a new city the size of Calgary every year for the next 7 years. Now, just imagine the amount of streets, utilities, recreational facilities, public services, and transport and stuff like that. That's such an insane number. And a good friend of mine works for a very large housing development company here in Southern Ontario. And he was telling me how every 2 years, the Canadian government just completely changes their code as to what building codes. He's like, pretty much every other year, we have to put a whole team into changing our actual blueprints and our models, and then going back and forth with the government and then being like, nope, okay, no, you actually have to change this. Now we have to, do a whole revision to the work we just did. He's like, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars we have to spend every couple of years just to keep up with their code. And it's fucking insane shit. So the one he was talking about that just happened was one of the code changes is the staircases leading up to a multiplex building need to be 2 feet longer. So they need to be higher and also wider. And it's like, first of all, where has this issue been? Like, I have never once heard in my life people be like, stairs here in Canada, they're a little
pretty steep. We need to increase that rise and runs ratio there. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. So nobody is asking for this. At a certain point, you have to think that all this is doing is the bureaucracy making changes in order to justify their existence.
That's all it is.
That's it.
So I've spent a lot of years in this business as well. A lot of the building codes are provincially run. Pretty much that's how they're managed. So Ontario Building Code is one of the most extreme building codes in the entire world. And Mississauga and Peel region, where I did a lot of building, it's the worst of the bunch. It is so insane, but it's so far beyond what's safe anymore. And what's interesting, so my dad grew up doing construction, so I did it with him when I was younger. And, they used to have inspectors that were builders. It would almost be like this, you'd kind of retire and go be an inspector for, 5-10 years, whatever these guys would do when your knees or your back wouldn't hold up anymore, right? But now these guys just come out of school and there's no logic. There's nothing involved. So they don't look at it and go, well, you should have used 2x8, but use 2x10. Okay, no problem. They go, that's supposed to be 2x8. You need to fix this. You're going, no, I used more than was necessary. There's just no room for calculation. There's no room for anything. It's everything by a book, and the book just gets more and more severe every single year. It's wild what they're doing here.
And then you wonder, okay, why is productivity so low? It's like because of these sorts of things.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, Ayn Rand, she was one of the foundational thinkers for kind of libertarianism and in that movement back in the mid and late 1900s. And she wrote a book that's kind of become a Bible for libertarians, which is called Atlas Shrugged. And it's a fictional novel, but the whole story that's kind of outlaid throughout that novel is it's a dystopian novel, but instead of it being like tyrannical, like say 1984 or Brave New World, where people are like inundated with this, the dystopian element in Atlas Shrugged was that the government regulation just became so large that nobody could really actually do anything functionally.
That's where
they couldn't produce. And that's exactly what you look at. And then even too, this is outside of the housing stuff, but even I've got a family member that works as a mechanic. He's got a shop. Now the government is requiring for safeties that you can't just go to your mechanic, get a safety done, and then have a certificate that they now give to the government and say, yep, this car was safety certified. It can be now sold. Now they want pictures of everything that you would put the safety. So like you have to send them pictures of the brake pads and this and that. And then it's like, who's
double the length of this?
Who's looking at this? Yeah. Like who needs to see this? And even, going back to my friend on the housing side of things, he was saying as well that there's one particular case where somebody bought a house and the paperwork has been sitting on the municipality desk since December. And it's now costing because they can't actually close the sale for this person. So right now, seeing as it's still all under his company, this person is essentially paying $1,000 a week to rent the home, just waiting for the approval of the sale from this municipality. And he called and said, hey, can I get an answer here as to why this paperwork has been in limbo since December? And the person was like, yeah, well, the person that's in charge of signing off on all that paperwork, they only work Mondays and half of Tuesdays. So like we can't really we have no idea as to when that'll be ready.
That's insane.
So, okay, yeah, we're going to put your future and your finances in the balance of all of this. And then we're going to have somebody that works 10 hours a week max on it.
I mean, one of the bigger problems too, when you kind of lay it out there, is housing is a problem at every level of government, right? And we already know how inefficient our federal government is. We actually know how inefficient all of our governments are. I would say municipal does the most, but they do a lot of them. They do a lot of things that are kind of useless in terms of like the scale of how to fix these big problems we talk about, right? But they are definitely involved. Like you said, like these municipal offices are the ones approving the building permits and stuff, right? So we already know they all work pretty slow, but this is a problem all of them need to work together on to fix. So when you consider that, and you consider all these little problems that you have, and all the little bureaucratic issues you have, and all the political diplomatic nonsense games that each one of these levels of government are playing around this issue, how do you actually ever get it fixed? There's so much noise, in each level of government, and their efficiency is only 20%. But it's when you add them all together, it actually gets lower because they have their own nonsense going on between them and their own communication problems. So it's like, I just don't know how this country is going to fix, repair, or improve any aspects of it under our current government system. I just don't get it, man. It's just, it's becoming so glaringly obvious. Like they've been getting away with it for a long time, having low efficiency, but now all Canadians are suffering. So I don't know what they're going to do. But if I'm being honest, I don't think they have the tools to fix it. So
I think what you would have to do is pull a Malay, walk in and just say, hey, this whole bureaucracy around, say, housing, 80% of the government staff is laid off. And people might think that the initial, well, that would just make all of the issues worse. But what ends up actually happening in that scenario is now they're forced in that situation to just pick the handful of things that are actually extremely important and then push off everything else and go, okay, we don't have the manpower to enforce regulation on new staircases and all this other bullshit. You don't have the staff to do, so now you don't have to worry about it. And then that also would free up all of the contractors to not have to worry about implementing those things. And you could actually really get the ball rolling on that front.
Yeah, but like you said, so it's not really, that's an interesting way to look at it. It's not really about improving the systems and housing accelerator funds and infrastructure funds. It's not really about that because you don't have the system over here you actually need to cut all the bureaucracy first before any of these systems can actually work. Otherwise, all you're doing is adding more fuel to the bureaucratic fire, essentially. Because if you put more money in these programs, these people are going to do more to justify their jobs. Well, this year it's two feet on the stairs, but next year it's you need another railing. You're going, what the fuck is going on? You need more fire safety, this, that, whatever it's going to be. And the thing is, all this stuff has been in place. Like we're sitting in a home right now. This place was built in the 90s. There's no problems here.
Yeah.
No one's come here since it was built. We have no issues. So what the fuck are we doing? You know what I mean? None of it makes any sense, especially you think about it. It should be like logical from an engineering perspective. There's no math that makes that add up. What are we doing? So it's like, yeah, you can look at this and say, hey, you need to keep throwing money at this and that and $750 billion for infrastructure. But if you don't burn the current system to the ground first, all you're going to do is light this money on fire.
Well, even look at what Elon did with Twitter, right? Walked in, axed 80% of the staff and said, look, all right, now your time period, you guys, there was so much staff that all of this time period was filled with useless things like meetings. Like the amount of meetings that people would have in a week is just astronomical. So look, now we have a much smaller staff that is focusing on only the nuts and bolts of what is absolutely necessary to run Twitter. And the rest of it is just gone. Yeah. We don't need to have all this other bullshit. All we need is the software and code so that the platform runs. And when it comes to all these other third-party initiatives and, DEI quotas and having a whole section of your business dedicated to making sure that those things are implemented, like just get rid of it all. Yeah. And then just focus on what is absolutely necessary.
It's interesting. Yeah. I like that bootstrap model. It's very libertarian, but it is like, if you get everything down to a bootstrap model, basically, if you get things down to a bootstrap formula, shit gets done. Yeah. And the other thing too, is you get to highlight your problems much easier too. Like you can sort of hide amongst everybody if you do a poor job when you've got a ton of bureaucracy. Right. But when you've got a bootstrap business model with 20 people instead of 1,000, you know where the bad apples are and they're gone right away. So you then you start improving efficiency again too. It's this weird thing. I wonder if this is like just the cycle of government, like, or it's like the cycle of an empire. It maybe is the same thing. And you and I just see it as government because that's the world we live in today. But the idea is like, no matter what, over time, it just becomes, it's the Purnell's ironclad law of bureaucracy. It just becomes so bureaucratic that it no longer accomplishes any goal. And the only way to fix it, whether through policy reform or violence, depending on the era you live in, is to absolutely burn it to the ground, which is what Malay is doing in Argentina, right? Because then you get down to that, you get down to that 20 from 100 people is actually probably more accurate. You get down to that 20% of people that are efficient and the system starts to work again and you can kind of work through all the bugs and then your economy and your whole society can start to flourish again. I just think we're at this point that it's got to fall. I just don't know what it looks like.
Well, that is actually the whole Pareto principle, which is that 80% of consequences are caused by 20% of actions. And so the way you can look at that is like, okay, 80% of book sales are done by 20% of authors. Or in this case, like, let's say you're a business, 80% of the efficiency that comes out of your business is going to be done by 20% of your employees. Right. And I mean, anybody that's worked in a business knows this or tried to manage stuff before where it's like, okay, let's say you and I are both familiar with the restaurant stuff. It's like, let's say you've got a team of 10 people on the floor. you're like, I got maybe 2 or 3 people that are like, if I pulled them out of this, everything would just be immediate chaos.
Yeah.
And those other 8 people are kind of just there to just make sure that these other 3 people have support, but they can run the whole floor by themselves if they needed to.
Yes.
And so that's exactly what I see happening here. And then there's also this other aspect where like the amount of time you set for a task is how long it will take you to complete it.
It's called
right?
Parkinson's law.
Right. Okay. That's what it is. And so, you look at this kind of stuff where you go, okay, we have all of these big things that we need to do from a bureaucratic sense in order to make housing work. Well, then yes, you just get bogged down and it ends up just becoming like just clogs the whole machinery rather than just being like, all right, what are the very few things that we need to do well and then do those things well and efficiently.
Yeah, you know what's funny to me, just to kind of cap off this piece. When people say, you don't want a businessman running the country. No, it's exactly what you want.
Yeah.
And I've heard that a lot over the years, and I think a lot of times people mean that because like, oh, a businessman won't have a heart or won't think about social programs, but it's like, no, a businessman knows how to run a business, a successful one, and that's exactly what this country is, and exactly how the macro aspects at the federal level, how it needs to be run. You don't necessarily need a businessman at your municipal level, but in federal politics, you need businessmen and women to fucking fix this country.
100%. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Canadians planning mass protests against uncontrolled and reckless immigration policies. On July 1st, the cities of Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, and Charlottetown will hold a quote-unquote nonpartisan protest against mass migration. Take Back Canada, the group organizing the protest, argues that mass immigration is raising the cost of living, creating job scarcity, and compromising safety. Quote, in some of the world's most impoverished countries, it is taken for granted that if you are willing to work, you can afford a roof over your head and enough space to raise a family. However, in our supposedly rich and prosperous nation, the basic human necessity seems attainable only for the highest achievers, while the majority of us suffer in silence, too defeated to hope for a brighter future, their statement reads. Take Back Canada's website emphasizes that the protest is not anti-immigration, inviting Canadians from diverse backgrounds and ideologies to unite in solidarity. However, when promoting their protest on Reddit, Take Back Canada was banned for allegedly violating the platform's community guidelines and promoting hate. So, if these protests gain significant traction, do you think they will face less, more, or the same amount of backlash as the Freedom Convoy?
Okay, so let's kind of zero in on the extreme challenge this group faces. That if they overcome it, they will actually have significant legs. These protests could be significant. Take Back Canada's website, like you said, emphasizes that the protests are not anti-immigration, inviting Canadians from diverse backgrounds and ideologies to unite in solidarity. This is a tough one, right? Because you're effectively protesting against a policy strategy, but the symptom is immigration. So how can you effectively accomplish this goal? It's going to be a very unique, sort of nuanced cultural phenomenon if they can pull it off. Especially because, as we know, the media will absolutely shred these people. That's what they're going to spend all their time doing. They will be called every acceptable, probably some unacceptable names in public, and the media will specifically weaponize the immigrants against them. So I think it's not will this be bigger than the Freedom Convoy? Is it, in terms of the pushback, it's how could they possibly overcome that challenge?
Yeah, because I think too, even in Canada, it's been this thing for the last, couple decades where, hell, even back into the 80s and 90s, like if you were to question immigration policies, it was like this was a sacred cow, especially in Canada. And, this is what's so crazy too, is when you bring up this topic to anybody, immediately like their head goes, well, like, we shouldn't have no immigration. You go like, that's not the conversation here. The conversation is not whether
it's not binary.
It's like, it's all about what's an acceptable level of immigration.
Exactly.
But what is actually definitely happening right now is just completely unsustainable.
Oh yeah.
And two, man, I think people are starting to really realize the negative aspects of quote unquote multiculturalism, right? So I think you can have multi-ethnicities, 110%. You can have a multi-ethnic country.
Yep, absolutely.
But they need to all be united under a standard culture.
There needs to be some form of assimilation.
Yes.
100%.
And
Whatever that may be, you need to have some sort of unity.
let's say you have a house and you invite, you have 10 people living in that house and you invite one person over. Well, the chances are that one person is just going to embed themselves with how the other 10 people are living. But if you have a house of 10 people and then you bring in 6 people from the same group that has lived together in their way, in their house, well, now they have enough kind of people to just be like, well, no, we're going to continue living our way. Like, screw the rest of the 10 of you.
Yep.
And that's exactly what you're seeing in all of these cities right now too. And like, there was a guy from True North, one of the reporters from True North, he was walking around downtown Brampton asking people that moved here from India if they think there's too many Indians in Brampton. And all of them were like, who knows, maybe he was selectively cutting it as well. Maybe
Sure.
he took out those, I don't know. But there was still a substantial number of people that immigrated here from India that were like, yeah, there's too many Indians here right now. Because you walk around downtown Brampton and you're like, wow, this is just like India.
Yeah.
Like, as far as all the businesses, all of it. And so, that's what ends up happening when you have mass migration is they don't assimilate. They just end up kind of creating their own little hub.
Everybody's living in the same city in their own little pockets together.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But the thing is, I don't even blame people.
No.
It's not, look, this is not a race thing. It's a culture thing. And a good way to explain it is like my mom moved here from Italy and from France. She didn't speak English. So when they came here, it wasn't about the color of their skin. They wanted to be around people that they could communicate with.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the thing is, for people to come into this country, there's pretty much like the threshold is almost non-existent. Like, sure, if you want to get citizenship, you have to pass the test, which I'm sure a lot of us wouldn't be able to, but anybody can prep for a test. Give me a fucking break. The thing is, people come here, they want to be around their own people. It's not a bad thing. They want to be able to communicate with and understand with and be around people that understand their culture. I get it. But the thing is, if you look at your example of the house, I mean, I'll look at the United States. The United States managed for a very long time. They're getting into a very bad spot right now. They managed to get over 300 million people in that country and it still be America. And now the one thing that I'll say, and I know a lot of people say it, is they do push their culture on people and they do stop other people from embedding their culture into policy. So in America, you're American first, then Italian, for example, right? In Canada, we've never done that. That's why us only having 40 million is actually a problem because we don't have the right system in place to maintain our culture. But what's actually happening in the United States right now, because of their mass migration, they're looking at millions of people coming in every year through that border. They're now currently at the highest terrorist threat level they've ever been at. Now, I don't know what these charts look like. I don't know if they made it up yesterday. I don't know if this is something they've been tracking for 50 years. I don't know. But the guy that did it works. He's a government. Obviously, it's government employees that are putting these reports together, and they specifically blamed Biden and his open borders for this current issue. And they said that there is no less than 8 people that have been arrested for terror threats that are correlated to ISIS, and this is just ISIS, let alone all the other ones in major cities, New York, Los Angeles, stuff like that. So like, when you have a good system like the states did have, it can work. You can have a melting pot and it can work. But when you blow the doors open and you bring people in uncontrollably, like you said, 6 out of 10 instead of 1 at a time, the system falls apart. That's exactly where we are.
Yeah. And then what ends up happening is it's not even too, like, a lot of the times, let's say it's not all of a sudden Canadians getting into confrontation with other cultures, but you see when you, like, okay, let's say you have, again, going back to the house analogy, well, if I've got this house and then I invite 2 people that I know hate each other into my house, that's going to turn into a conflict. And I remember messaging, I texted a friend, I was like, oh, I love multiculturalism because right now we've got Arab people protesting Jewish people in front of an American embassy in Canada. Like, how does this make sense?
Yeah.
Like, this has nothing to do with Canada, but all of a sudden we're in these, like, now Canada is involved culturally in a battle that has been going on for centuries, which is the Middle East.
Of course, yeah.
Right? So they've been fighting over the Holy Lands for time. And now all of a sudden we're just taking those 2 groups that have been fighting each other on the other side of the planet and putting them as next door neighbors here.
And what's interesting about that too is the spillover, like the contact high people get, because when these things get momentum inside of society or inside of culture because they're using Canada as their playground. Look at all these people that are now jumping in. Look at all the university protests. Look at what's going on. That's the fallout from these issues. People just don't like to connect those dots, but it is what it is, man.
Yeah, and it's getting pretty crazy. Like even you sent me the McGill encampment for the Palestinian protests are now saying they're going to host anti-Israel, quote, revolutionary youth summer programs. So they're going to essentially teach radicalization to these people in the name of Palestine against Israel. And again, that's my exact point.
Who the fuck is putting their kid in that summer camp? You lunatic.
Yeah.
I was like, I literally had to write, this is not satire when I sent it to you, because I'm like, I cannot believe this is real. Unbelievable right now. Wild.
Yeah. So the whole idea that this is making our country more strong.
This is
just
wild,
insane.
actually, when you think about it. It's like every generation's got their own little their quirks and little things to work through. But like, I haven't seen a time in university. Like, I'm a little short on history, so bear with me, and you can correct me if you can think of a moment in time. But where you've seen these university students doing something like this is a pretty violent and actually racist thing that's happening right now inside these universities. And now they're going to hold these revolutionary camps, summer camps for kids against Jewish people. Like, what the fuck's going on? How did we get to this point right now? It's pretty insane.
Multiculturalism.
Yeah, but yeah, fair. But I mean, it's just crazy to me, because like, I do have to highlight that this is political. And the reason I have to highlight this is coming from the liberal camp. Can you imagine? This is what's fucked up. Conservatives, what is their favorite piece of rhetoric to throw at conservatives? You're a Nazi.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly how these people are behaving. I know that's a little hyperbolic, but that's how these people are behaving. In fact, if this wasn't coming out of a left-wing camp, everybody that would be protesting would be thrown in jail if this was a conservative idea or a conservative strategy. Even, I think it was 2 days ago, there was a anti-Israel encampment in Canada that had stomped on, and I thought, oh, whatever, you're going to stomp on a Jewish flag, whatever. They had drawn swastikas all over the thing. What else do you need to see?
Yeah.
What's happening right now? This is but they have coverage because the political camp they're in, which is fucking insane. I'm swearing a lot today.
No, it's valid. But you look, like, I even went for a run around the U of T campus protest encampments the other day. And it is genuinely insane what is happening there right now, because you go around in, like you said, you made the Nazi analogy, whether just any tyrannical and violent ideology of the past, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, even say, for instance, the KKK with their hoods and all of this, if you have to hide your identity while you're protesting in the name of a so-called glorious cause, maybe you should check, because here's what the encampment looked like. So there was originally the kind of chicken wire fences put up around the yard of the U of T.
Sure.
And then so they ended up using that and kind of as their encampment grounds. But now what they've done is they've gone around and they have walled off everything with like tarps. So now you can't even see into the encampment. All around the encampment is Palestinian flags. I'm talking like 20 Palestinian flags flying all around the encampment. And then everybody walking in and out has their faces covered. And you go like,
what the hell?
How am I supposed to imagine for even a moment that you have good intentions when you're taking this level of both? Again, you can't just get into the encampment. You have to have, if you don't have a student ID card, you have to be referenced by somebody that is already within the encampment to be like, yeah, this person's cool. So yeah, like they've literally like set up which is hilarious that they've set up a border, because these people are like, no borders are racist.
The hell's going on?
And now they've literally got a border set up, and there's being like, no, you can't come in. You can't come in.
That's wild.
Yeah. And so like, yeah, this is all the direct result of these mass migration policies that these people are protesting. So again, I think it's necessary. It's time that definitely this whole narrative around mass migration kind of gets gets pushed back on a little bit because, I mean, whatever. We're even seeing it across Europe right now.
Well,
they're
they're having a huge right wing changeover in politics over there. This is a primary reason. This is a big one. And immigration there is an even bigger issue because all these countries are so much closer together too. So it's pretty wild. And they get a lot of people from over east and in Africa as well. And they just run amok. And it's yeah, like you said, I think you can compare it to almost anything in politics, but like just take the housing we just talked about. It's gone too far. So it needs to be checked. And the only way to do that is to completely eliminate the program and start fresh with a bootstrap model. Same thing with immigration. You know, it's just give it another spin. You need to stop what you're doing. You need to dial everything back, and you can only bring in people at a rate that your infrastructure can allow. And currently, that means slowing it down to very, very little for probably a couple of years to really sort of get our bearings again.
Yeah, like to put it in perspective, we roughly averaged around 200,000 people a year.
Permanent?
Permanent.
Yeah.
And now we're at 500,000 permanent. And so
what's crazy is you add in the non-permanents and you get up to 1.3, 1.4 million. And it's nuts. And people will say, oh, the thing is you look at it and you say, okay, well, it's a rotating door. It isn't. These people are here for 4 to 6 years. And the thing you got to think about is it's ramping up significantly now. So you're actually compounding that number. At 200,000, arguably your non-permanents would have been maybe 300-400, but now it's closer to 1 million. And now they're looking at just giving these people green cards. You know what I mean? Just, you guys can stay based on whatever this liberal policy is currently. That's actually one thing I'll finish this point off with. You look at this protest against immigration policies, right? And you go, how is the media and the government going to vilify these people? And if they continue floating policy around giving citizenship to all these illegal immigrants, that's a very, very good way to snuff out this protest very fast and make them look like the villain, especially in the media.
All right, before we head into our next topic here, if you wouldn't mind leaving a thumbs up on this video and subscribing to our YouTube channel, that would be greatly appreciated as it helps this podcast grow. All right, so next we've got leaders warning of diplomatic isolation if Canadian military spending targets are not met. Canada risks growing alienation from its international partners if it continues to miss NATO defense spending targets. The Business Council of Canada, representing top business leaders and CEOs, has urged Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to devise a plan to meet NATO's 2% defense spending target. Business Council of Canada CEO Goldie Hyder emphasized that Canada's allies are increasingly calling for it to meet these targets, warning that continued failure could lead to diplomatic isolation. Hyder said, quote, "There is a growing concern that Canada, one of the 12 founding NATO members, will be singled out at the upcoming summit as the only member not committed to investing at least 2% of its GDP on defense by the end of the decade. This isolation could have serious implications for Canada's security and economic partnerships. So, should Canada be embarrassed about the current state of its military?"
This one's a tough one for me, to be honest. But here's the thing. Sometimes in life, you can't change the game you're playing. For example, I believe life is basically a game Monopoly. You can either learn the rules and win or fight reality, and you ultimately lose the game, right? That's kind of the way I see the economy and society we live in. Now, I realize this is a first world game for the most part. But my point is, you can't win in this society unless you come to this realization and play the game you're in. You may not like it, but that is what it is. So anyway, my point is this. I don't agree with war or military spending. However, at the macro level, the world is playing a game called Risk. You're familiar. And the goal is simple. Players aim to conquer their enemies' territories by building an army, moving their troops in, and engaging in battle. That's exactly what's happening. Just look around. So if Canada wants to survive as a mere pawn in this game, because that's all we really are, we need to pay the toll, which in this case is 2% of our GDP for protection, essentially, right? And look, it's not great, but humans are not great. And this is just the game that our generation was handed. And like I wrote in the news, if Canada is looking for places to maybe find the additional capital, perhaps we could cut the additional 110 million that we just gave to DEI programs in the country, right?
Yeah. So the fact that we sit here and we're missing defense spending targets, and then also, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into terrible policies and programs in order to diversify Canada's government and fight systemic racism and all of this kind of stuff.
It's kind of funny how their whole agenda is just like, we're like against the immigration strategy because it's way out of hand. And then you have these DEI programs that come in to sort of bolster this immigration problem you have. And you're just like, oh God, all right. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but if a government is to exist, and this is kind of more, say, a libertarian idea, is that it should have very few functions, which is one, to protect its borders, which you need a military to do, to uphold private property rights so that people can actually form an economy and buy and sell. And then 3 would be to provide courts. And so in my eyes, if a government is going to exist, it should do those 3 things well before it ever even considers taking on another aspect, because those are maybe the only places that you can argue that a government's existence is necessary. But, and this is something that I've come around to a lot more, is where I say against defense spending, but like the whole concept of peace through strength. It's very much like, if you're strong and if you look like you can't actually be invaded, or that there would be enough negative consequences of doing so, then there's actually much more likely going to be peace. And then it actually just comes up to that fact where it's like, you need to be the biggest guy in the yard, but then you also need to have the values of going, I am not going to be a blatant aggressor. And so you do actually end up causing peace through strength, and kind of like, hey, yeah, or even the mutually assured destruction idea of
with
being
nukes.
like, we're not going to war because shit would be so bad if we did that neither of us would possibly win.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree that is the unfortunate reality. Like I said, it's a game of risk. That is the unfortunate reality of today's society globally. But again, we're a little bitch on that scale. We are nothing but a pawn. Our role, in my opinion, is to meet these targets so that we can continue to buy protection. That being said, there's also a benefit to us having a strong military for Canadians as well. And the benefit is you can't get rolled over on. You know what I mean? Like, I realize that we're a small pawn. I do get that. But the thing is, like, we do have natural resources. We do have these other things that we can offer the world. But if we don't have a strong military, how much easier will it be for countries to kind of get in here and bully? That is the system that we are a part of today. We live in a world where global superpowers have to show everyone how big their dick is so that we don't have war. It's just an unfortunate reality. I wish that it weren't that way. I wish we did not need a military. But unfortunately, again, this is the game that we are playing. And guys like you and I, everybody listening, we do not have the parts to change this game. We just can't. It's a generational problem. In fact, I think it's maybe even an evolutionary problem. I think humans are so broken as individuals that we've continued to repeat this in history over and over and over again. Unless we change something significant within ourselves, I don't think this is ever going to change. And in this game we're playing, like I said, Canada is just this small little pawn. And the only way we can adequately buy protection in this world is to basically meet these targets. Otherwise, there's some other diplomatic price to pay. Whether it's resources or something economic, it's going to come out of our hide in some other way. It's not just going to be status quo if we don't meet these targets. So again, like I said, I'm not for war and I'm not really for military spending, but look at the game you're playing and you have to play the cards you're dealt.
Yeah. And, you say that this is a human fault, but I actually think this is just actually nature, because so many animals, but people will point to the whole thing about borders and be like, borders are silly. They're a human invention. They're just this imaginary line. And in a sense, they are. You can make that case. But then you go look at, say, wolf packs, coyotes, mountain lions, jaguars, elephants even. They create within their own packs territories. And or even chimps are a great example of this, our closest other animal relative, right? They'll create a territory, and if a other tribe comes into that territory, they will fuck shit up. And so, like, it is very similar. It's not just a human thing in a sense, but I do agree with you where if humanity ever wanted to actually overcome this problem, it's having to look inside, because it's always the other person that's the big baddie that we need to go and get. And then you end up, when you realize, or when you're putting all of that evil or badness on another group and saying that they're the harbingers of evil, and if we get rid of them, there would be peace. It's like, you're actually most likely to be that kind of person that would be evil as well. And I think I ended off that thing with Alexander Solzhenitsyn's quote, which was that, the line of good and evil doesn't go across nations or political parties, but rather is through every individual human heart. And I believe that to be completely true. But like, again, as much as I agree with those things, we do also have to look at the practical situations and reality as it exists and go, yeah, Canada maybe shouldn't be here as a country and completely relying on the fact that we live just to the north of the strongest military power to ever exist in humanity's history. And therefore, we don't need to do shit because our neighbors are bigger than us. We're essentially the little brother that never works out because he's got a big brother. He feels like he could be like, whoa, I'll call my big brother and beat you up.
Yeah.
But that isn't, I don't think of that as a good strategy because it just, first of all, it makes us look extremely weak on the global stage. And then also too, yeah, you see foreign countries now just completely interfering with us because
you're vulnerable.
What reprisal do I fear?
Yeah,
you're not an economic power. You're not a military power. Like, how are you going to fuck with me back?
You can't, exactly. You basically, if I can cross those diplomatic lines and not it not come at a cost, like for China doesn't give a shit what diplomatic allies of Canada's do to China. They don't care. Mm-hmm. So they'll come in here and just do whatever they want. Because what the fuck can Canada do? Nothing. In fact, our prime minister will just sell them secrets to win an election.
Yeah.
Cuck.
That's so wild.
But I mean, to your point about good guys and bad guys, look, the game of Risk, I think, is a good example again, because there are no good guys and bad guys. Just like there's no good guys or bad guys in global politics or military affairs. There are only powerful people willing to do horrible things to gain power or to hang on to what they have. That's the system that we're a part of. It sucks, but it is what it is.
I actually think too, like once you get into this geopolitical realm, this game of Risk, the concept of good and bad just completely goes out the window.
100%.
All that exists in that world is power.
That's power and profit. That's the game.
That's it. And they'll weaponize the concepts of good and bad in order to accrue more power and justify their use of power.
And motivate people. They'll manipulate people, use the media tools. Of course they will. You have an enemy to fight, the war on drugs, the war against terror. Fuck you guys.
Yeah.
You just keep spending money on the military industrial complex in the States anyway.
Yeah.
But it's just nonsense.
But it is crazy the ramp up that we are seeing. I mean, even it doesn't look like Russia and Ukraine is going to come to an end at any time soon. Zelensky's whole peace plan was that Russia needs to completely leave the regions that they've annexed. And then Russia is saying, well, if you guys want peace and a ceasefire, you have to leave all of the areas that we've annexed and give them to us. And so you've got two parties that are just literally saying the exact opposite of one another.
But I love how they're both like, hey, we want peace.
Yeah.
But we both want exactly what we want. And it's got to go this way 100% or it's not happening.
Yeah.
Also, you need to be neutralized. Like, what?
Yeah.
What did you say?
Yeah.
Okay, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. This is not going to happen anytime soon.
Exactly. And then, too, we just saw as well, Russia has now warships around Cuba, which then Canada and America.
Apparently that was just an exercise and it was a friendly and they do it all the time and whatever. I think the timing was just one of those funny things.
Yeah.
Because they did have a nuclear capable sub there, but there's no nukes on it or anything like that. And Canada and America went to like, oh, it's just an exercise. Canada and America now admitted they went down there specifically because the Russian ships were there. But the whole thing was over contextualized in the arena of diplomacy.
Yeah.
Like, hey, look, we're going down there. We've already been planning to go down there. We go down there frequently. We're going to port there. We're letting you know we're going down there. So then they go, it's not really a war tactic, in my opinion.
I'm not saying it's a big war tactic, but I do think it is kind of symbolic to that idea where it's just like, hey, we could be here. Military exercises are designed usually to send a signal.
I agree.
And so like whether it be North Korea is running military exercises of firing missiles off into the ocean, it's not meant as a direct attack, but it's now like, look at our capabilities.
Yeah.
We have the capability to send a missile 200 miles or whatever it may be.
Sure. But I agree with you, but you also see, like, to your point of there not being good guys and bad guys. Yeah, Russia did it, but you see that America just did one of their largest military training exercises in history over in the South China Sea. Yeah. Like, I mean, you look at kind of what's going on. Like, I agree. That's exactly what's happening, what they're doing. But at the same time, to me, it's that douchebag with the puffed up chest at the bar who says, hold me back 100%. To his friends when they're already holding him back. Yeah. Whatever, buddy. Yeah. Cool. That's kind of what these things are.
That's exactly what these things are. But getting into a different form of warfare that is quite a lot more terrifying, actually, I think, is our next story, which is the bioweapon blueprint, how China may be manufacturing the next pandemic with Canada's help. So concerns are being raised about Canada's involvement with China's gain-of-function research, which aims to create bioweapons. After assessing data, physicians and scientists are worried that the Wuhan Institute of Virology is experimenting with the Nipah virus, which the CDC lists as a potential bioterrorism agent. There are particular concerns about the involvement of Winnipeg lab scientists who were secretly sharing Nipah samples to the Chinese government. Dr. Stephen Quay, a physician scientist and CEO of Atossa Therapeutics, has been highlighting the increased number of laboratories worldwide conducting dangerous viral research since the COVID-19 pandemic, raising the risk of accidental or intentional releases of deadly pathogens. So, does humanity need to approach biowarfare with the same level of caution as nuclear warfare?
Yeah, I mean, that was already kind of the strategy. There's already a lot of things that are off limits. We've just seemed to have found this new space where all these people that think they know more than the rest of us are working in, which is super dangerous. I mean, it's insane. What really kind of blows my mind here is how complicit Canada has been in this arena. I mean, from my understanding, I think you did a little more research on this, but Trudeau, wittingly, I love that phrase these days, traded biolab secrets or perhaps literal samples of this stuff for help in the election. So, I mean, when you think about that, is there anything more treasonous the leader of our country could do than give China, the country statistically responsible for the COVID pandemic, an even more dangerous virus? If weaponized, Trudeau may be guilty of countless deaths worldwide in an effort to manipulate an election. If this is true, honestly, there's no adequate punishment for that man.
Yeah, so the way that all went down was Trudeau's head of pathogens, who are these scientists at the Winnipeg lab, gave a general from the People's Liberation Army of China complete access to the lab, and they were sending back and forth these samples and data of extremely deadly pathogens like this Nipah virus and such. They were also sending them in unmarked packages and stuff labeled kitchen utensils.
Right.
So this was happening all under the table. Whether Trudeau was directing them to do this or not, that is very much still up in the air. However, what is for certain is when he got this information, he didn't launch an investigation. He didn't fire those scientists until they later came out until this whole story got out and he was forced to. Instead, he buried the reports of this and then went on to continue to try and buy vaccines from the Chinese government and called a snap election. And so whether he was doing it as a direct favor in terms of votes, who knows, in election interference from China's end, or say maybe this is like the most gracious take that you could give Trudeau in this sense, is that he thought in the 2021 election, okay, if this information gets out, it is going to be over the top damning and just completely ruin my chances of election ever again. So I'm going to call a snap election right now so I have 4 more years if this thing comes out 2 months from now. And so that's the most gracious aspect that you could give him, is just that he was trying to cover his own ass. But how complicit he has been in this, who knows?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of gotten to that point. It's kind of like accessory to murder. You know what I mean? Like you maybe didn't pull the trigger, but I feel like he sold the guy the gun, gave him the bullets, knew it happened, and let him hide out in his house.
Yeah. That's
kind of where this has gotten at this point. You know what I mean? It's like maybe selling a guy guns not a huge problem, but now that everything's happened, and now that based on the story I just told, and now that you're letting that guy hide out at your house to get away with it, like you're complicit, and that's kind of where he's at. I mean, I think, like you said, the gracious approach you can take is that he didn't do it himself, and he just covered it up, knowing it was going to damage the Liberal Party. That's totally fucked up. That's 100% not okay. But I'm of the mind that he was a little more involved in it, and the reason is because Trudeau has a tendency and has had a pattern of throwing other people under the bus for problems, right? And I'm of the opinion, if he had nothing to do with this, he would have let it sit. And when it came out, he would have just weaponized it. This person's to blame. It's all their fault. They're being fired. Don't worry about it. We got it under control. Instead, he tried to bury the whole thing. So to me, it does make me feel like he was a little more involved off the hop. That's the way I feel. But again, it's a hunch.
Yeah, and then on the biowarfare front, I think people are waking up to the fact that our governments are playing with these viruses and doing gain of function in order to make them both more deadly and more transmissible. which is just research that whoever came up with the initial idea of conducting this type of research, like, wish you could just go back in time and just
100%
strangle maybe a little bit. But like, because this research is terrifying. And I mean, it's not even conspiratorial to say anymore that the COVID pandemic was most likely, if not entirely, caused by a lab leak. Or who knows, maybe it was a weaponization. Maybe it was intentional. Who knows? But worst, again, the most favorable take you can give to China on this end was that it just escaped by accident out of this lab. But, you know, whether these things come out intentionally or accidentally, they're going to have the same effect. And my whole point is, like, this isn't even new. Governments have been playing with this ridiculous idea for the longest time. I remember telling you about Operation PX, which was also known as Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, which was planned by a Japanese military, which was going to be an attack on civilians in the United States using biological weapons during World War II. And the proposal was for Imperial Japanese Navy submarines to launch seaplanes that would deliver weaponized bubonic plague developed by Unit 731, which anybody should go and Google Unit 731. It is insane what they were doing. And the whole idea was to infect America with the bubonic plague right around the same time that America was playing with the idea of dropping nuclear bombs on Japan. And this got passed in Japan. It wasn't even just like an idea. They said, yep, this is a good idea, and we're going to start executing on it. And it was it was the chief of the Army General Staff who essentially shut the whole thing down. And he's like, no, we're not doing this. Like, this is insane. And what's crazy too is part of their plan, it was a suicide mission. So these people that worked, the soldiers were going to infect themselves with the bubonic plague and then essentially just storm America, like in San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles, all of this kind of stuff. And then just go and just try to infect anybody they could. And it was, they were going to put themselves, it wasn't even like they were going to drop, like say like out of a sci-fi
virus
movie,
bomb.
like virus
Yeah,
bomb,
right.
like you would normally see in a sci-fi movie. In the Japanese too, back in World War II, they were known for their kamikaze missions too, right? So like they were not above just kind of martyrdom.
No. I think we've also touched on this before too. Like the number of lab leaks they've had in the last, they've had 20, I think, in the last like 15 years or something like that. They happen all the time, and they're always like they've happened through COVID. One of them was a COVID virus in the middle of COVID. You know what I mean? Like I remember that specifically. It's like these happen all the time. These people are not infallible. They for some reason think they are, and they make massive errors. But I mean, it's for me, it's a lot more about human error than malintent. You know what I mean? It's just like you don't know any better, and you can't control these things, and you're playing with fire. And the one that I always go back to is the one they found in the States where they were doing gain of function research on the COVID virus. The lab rats had been manipulated to have more human-like lungs.
Right.
100% kill rate. 100% kill rate. They put it in the Science magazine. Like, you should be in a lot of trouble for gain of function research. They go, no. We didn't mean for this to happen. Happened by mistake. That is way more scary. You know anybody? But here we are. So
yeah. And well, this leads into the next story, which is the former CDC director predicting that the bird flu virus will cause the next pandemic. Dr. Robert Redfield, former CDC director, predicts that the next major pandemic will be caused by bird flu. He warns that it's a matter of when, not if, this will happen. Recently, the highly pathogenic avian influenza virus was detected in a cow herd in Wyoming, marking the 12th state with an infection. The bird flu has a significant mortality rate of 25 to 50% when it infects humans. Redfield is more concerned about the virus becoming highly infectious to humans through gain-of-function research rather than natural evolution. He recalled that such research was conducted on the avian influenza virus in 2012 against his recommendations. Since late March, the avian influenza virus has been reported in over 80 dairy herds across the country, with 3 human infections reported so far. The CDC is closely monitoring the situation, although the current risk to public health remains low. They are using flu surveillance systems to track H5N1 activity in people and working with states to monitor those with animal exposures. So is this simply more government fear-mongering in order to seize more authoritarian control, or is it a legitimate threat?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very legitimate threat. I mean, in my opinion, there are several troubling aspects to this current situation. I mean, first, the financial benefits are alarming. Big Pharma made over $100 billion in profit from the COVID pandemic. And that's not revenue, that's profit. That's a wild amount of money. Second, the gain of function research, which many of us strongly oppose, is completely out of control. And this highly dangerous research is being conducted in dozens of labs worldwide by people who believe they're infallible. But we know that this is a dangerous overconfidence. I mean, we also know that there was I think 14 biolabs in Ukraine alone. And I don't even know what they're doing there, but that's a significant reason why they can't let these things go, or at least out of the gates, we got to clean some of this stuff up. Finally, the political benefits are significant, right? Governments expanded their power during the pandemic in unprecedented ways, which many of us felt. And it's led to widespread censorship and control mechanisms that we're currently fighting against today. So when you combine all these factors, it's pretty clear that, I share the same sentiment as Dr. Redfield here, that it's not really a question of if, but when the next pandemic will hit. And what's particularly discouraging is our uncertainty about how to effectively neutralize this looming threat. What I mean by that, how do we stop these maniacs from doing this? We can't. We're basically, these people that are doing this work in these gain of function labs, they have these godlike sort of personalities where they think they're bigger than or larger than and won't make these mistakes, but they're continuing to do it, right? I mean, look, historically, global pandemics have been a once in a century event, significant global pandemics. But given the current landscape, it's hard to believe that we won't face another one within this decade.
Yeah. And what sucks is that I want to be able to say, if the public health comes out and says, hey, this thing is an issue and we need to deal with it, I would like to live in a world where I have a reason to believe them and can actually say go along with them. But after what happened throughout COVID, hell, they could be actually bird flu is spreading. And my initial thought would be, this is all bullshit. And I would go the opposite way this time around, because look, to your point about what they did with with expanding their own powers, even just the level of gaslighting that is currently happening about how we handled the last pandemic is extremely concerning. I have no faith that these institutions have learned from the last one into, one, how to actually properly convey the information that is necessary to convey to the population, but then that they'll even act on goodwill. Check out this little monologue of them just completely gaslighting us about the vaccination.
Individuals are allowed to make their own choices. There may be all sorts of different reasons why someone is hesitant to get vaccinated. And therefore, while not forcing anyone to get vaccinated, enforcement measures in place will make sure that everyone is vaccinated.
People to have their jobs, to keep their jobs, were forced to have the vaccination. Now, do you retract your statement that they were not forced?
Senator, no, I believe firmly that nobody was forced to have a vaccine.
There's people that don't want this mandatory vaccine. How do we manage this?
Well, then they won't be going to work.
Okay.
It's very, very simple.
I believe everybody was offered an opportunity to get a vaccine or not get a vaccine. I don't believe that anybody was forced to take a vaccine.
We have said no, you must get vaccinated.
In terms of the vaccine mandates, I acknowledge that it was a challenging time for people, but they ultimately made their own choices.
A vaccine mandate is being expanded to around 40% of all workers.
You basically see the two different classes of people. If you're vaccinated or if you're unvaccinated, you have all these rights. If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is, so, yep.
Hospitality, hairdressers and gyms can operate at all levels if they ask customers for a vaccine certificate.
There was no compulsory vaccination. People made their own choices.
And so it follows that if customers must be vaccinated, then so too must the workers.
Yeah. So that is my thing with all of this, is even if it poses a legitimate threat, I trust these people so little now that how am I even supposed to properly prepare when I don't? You could literally hand me, this thing could come out tomorrow. You could hand me the actual best case scenario of what I should do to protect myself. And I would look at all of you and just be like, I don't trust you. I'm not doing those things.
They cried wolf.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they cried wolf, but also still ripped your throat out.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild what they did. And they've lost a lot of trust. The media has lost a lot of trust. But it's interesting because guys like you and I, and me specifically through the pandemic, I know a lot more people trust me on these topics than they trust the media and the government. The information's there. They're just painting it in such a way that they're cherry picking data to sell you a narrative where they're not forcing you to get vaccinated. But if you don't do it, you just lose everything.
Yeah. It's like that. One of my favorite lines from George Orwell's Animal Farm, showing the doublethink of authoritarian regimes, where at one point he says, the work was strictly voluntary, but anyone who absented himself had their rations cut in half. And you're like, yeah, so you're going to coerce me. You're going to tell me that you're going to make my life hell. You're going to interfere with my ability to have work or to, make a living, to put food on the table.
Go places. Yeah.
And then you're going to tell me that you didn't force me, that was still my decision. It's like, yeah, but you gave me the decisions you gave me. Yes, I did make a decision, but the decisions you gave me were lose my career, go hungry, let my family starve, or take this vaccine.
Or toe
That's
your
not
line.
much of a decision.
That's so disgusting.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully, I hope that this isn't a real threat, because I think the actual catastrophes that would happen if it were to be a real threat would be massive, because just like us, I feel like we are not alone in this sense.
Dude, how could you say this is like, I appreciate that you don't want it to be a real threat. We're already buying bird flu vaccine.
Yeah.
We're already buying them.
Yeah.
How much safety testing have they done? We've already got, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands. Other countries are buying them up too. Everyone's preparing for this pandemic.
Yep.
And this guy's saying, hey, look, this is what I think is going to happen. He may be wrong, but it will be something else. And based on those facts, based on the fact that we're doing gain of function research, based on the economic factors and the political gain, this is happening. And I guarantee you, shouldn't say guarantee, I'm of the mind it is happening within this decade.
Yeah. Well, even look, what I'm saying is, like, if a real deadly pandemic was to come across, it would be worse because of how they handled the COVID.
100% agree.
Because now, even again, I'm not, even if that vaccine worked, in that, like, until I have a year or two down the line of proof that,
oh, y'all can take that shit and then tell me what you're doing in 10 years. I'm good.
Yeah, that all of a sudden athletes aren't dropping.
Look, here's the thing. I'm young and healthy. I take really, really good care of myself. The best thing humans can do to proactively take care of themselves are exercise and eat proper food. And then obviously do things to keep your mind calm as well, meditate, stuff like that's what you can do.
We were recently talking about how often people tell us in regards to the show, okay, what do we do about this? A lot of it is just like, prepare. Like, hey, okay, if they're going to start weaponizing pathogens, then make sure that you are in the top health condition that you can possibly be in.
100%.
That's your only option. And this is where that kind of, this is where I really like Stoic philosophy, is it's like, don't allow yourself to be disturbed at all by things that you do not have control over, which is things like this. So don't allow yourself to be afraid. Don't allow yourself to be angry over them, but just focus and put all of your energy into how you react to these things, because that's the only thing that you really do have power over. And the way to act about these things is to prepare yourself for them.
Totally. 100% agreed. Actually leaving people on a good, positive note today.
Anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's everything.
All right. Before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our website to sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 6 days a week. That's blendrnews.com, BLENDR news.com. And if you're interested in getting more of our original articles and some more behind the scenes and extended podcast episodes, don't forget to head over to our Substack as well, which will be in the description below. All right. Catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.